Hey guys, welcome to another Consult ROI podcast. Today we're talking about shielding your success, how to make sure that all that hard work, that years of pain, frustration, sleepless nights, and everything doesn't go to waste. You really we all like to think that nothing bad will ever happen to us. It'll just happen to everybody else. The reality is that's far from the truth. Sometimes it's as simple as a car accident or somebody hitting you and putting one of your service vehicles out of commission. Had that happen. We've had a deer charge the side of another vehicle and everything. We've had family deaths that have occurred. We have all sorts of things that come up, and I've been through a lot of these, and they've been major setbacks to where, think of it as like you're an investment portfolio, right? You can do all this hard work to build and put in all this wealth, but sometimes you put it into the wrong investment and it plummets. All that money and everything else that you've put into it has lost value at that point. And now you're actually have less money than you initially put in. And then especially when you take into consideration inflation, now that's even less money, right? And so it can be very difficult, especially when your retirement is contingent on that. You are trying to live comfortably. You're dependent upon that to live. It's the same thing with your business. If something happens to you, you get into a bad accident, you have a drunk driver hit you or something else. Do you have measures in place to make sure that you don't lose all of your hard work, that your family is able to still make ends meet, to still have some core essentials in that, or cash flow or other things that exist to make sure that you can get through that and not be in a worse spot or have to consider even having to shut down your doors, right? This is true in all aspects of life, and that it doesn't matter if it's your business, your personal life, or anything else. A lot of people think, again, that I am so risk adverse by owning my own company. The reality is I did business because it was the least risky thing for me to do. I knew that when I had another job, my pay, my worth, my entire, again, everything.
Livelihood, right?
Yeah, my entire livelihood, it depended on somebody else's actions. And maybe it was just a lack of trust in other people, maybe a lot of things. But based on my personal experience, based on how many times I've personally have gone through things of that. Like, for example, I had a boss before that got indicted for fraud, that took everybody's paychecks in the entire company and skipped town.
Oh, bad.
Yeah. So, granted, you don't have necessarily that much of that risk when you're working with bigger companies or other things, right?
Yep.
But it doesn't change that to me, and based on my experiences, it still was a substantial higher risk to trust somebody else than it was to trust in myself. And then at that point, I got to determine myself, what am I worth and everything. It doesn't mean that I didn't make bad calls. I didn't make bad investments. I didn't make really bad shortcuts or try to go cheap on insurance and then found out that the insurance didn't cover all the damage or other stuff and everything when something did happen. Like, for example, we had our construction company. I did have my truck and found out, long story short, that when somebody hit us and everything, none of the damage that was caused on the trailer was covered at all. They didn't want to cover any of it.
Even though it's hooked to the truck?
Yeah, exactly. So it would cover any damage that it caused, but it wouldn't cover any damage done to the trailer itself.
Wow.
It's stupid.
Yeah.
Because it was uninsured motorist coverage and so forth, which means they only kicked in so much. And so there's all these stupid loopholes, and insurance is in the business making money. So this is where having like an actual agent that knows the policies, that knows all these shortfalls, the limitations of that, it is paramount for making it where you don't have something like that. Because that was a $14,000 lesson.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
conservatively. It's probably closer to 18, but it doesn't matter. It still is a very expensive lesson that I didn't need to learn. And that if I had actually done more due diligence or anything else. So really, this is something that I would recommend probably doing at least once a year, to go re-review all your policy, any changes, actually talk with different agents and that, to have them review it, they have that expertise, and then making sure that you have done the best decision for you. Another one,
Because you know your business better than they do, right? So they're just going to be
yeah.
like, yeah, these policies, they're black and white. They say X, Y, Z, but crazy scenarios or situations that do have potential of coming up, maybe minimal risk, maybe high risk of occurring. And what is that going to look like for your business?
So this is another one and everything. And again, I had a lot of, so this is the difference between finding people that are strategic consultants in their craft versus the person that's just there for the paycheck, right? So most agents out there, and I'll tell you right now, most 99.9% of all insurance agents out there are usually the ones that just like, hey, well, yeah, here's the cheapest coverage, here's the range and everything, and they won't give you anything else besides that. Well, here's the cheapest coverage. And that's
Yeah.
typically what they do. When you actually have a decent consultant one, they will actually tell you. Like, for example, and one of these was actually my own fault and everything, because I didn't think that I needed very much equipment coverage. I was like, hey, let's just do the minimal on that. And I didn't read the fine print on that. It's still covered up to like $5,000 of personal property. But what I didn't understand out of that is, out of anything that was over, I think it was $1,200 or $1,500 at the time, needed its own insurance policy or to be written as a line item on that. Well, that was half of my tools. Like literally, one of my cable certifiers was 18,000. Another one was 45,000. I literally had somebody cut the locks on our trailer and steal over $100,000 of tools.
Wow. Yeah.
And none of it was covered.
So if you're the agent who is that top 1% that does take that consultative approach to your customers, reach out to us. We'd love to hear what that looks like for you and how they go about it.
Yeah. And a lot of this is contingent on you, right? Because you know certain risks and that. And if you haven't thought about it, then you need to. You need to understand what your risks are that happens. Like if you have equipment trailers out on the road, or if you have a van, I've noticed that when I have a vehicle or service vehicle at my house and everything, my house gets targeted significantly higher for theft and everything else. Because people will check doors and that, and I'll see them on camera. So that's just and the people that have a company vehicle or truck or something like that, if you don't know this, then you probably should put a camera there, because I guarantee you're probably having somebody check your doors at least once every month. And so the one time that you leave it unlocked or whatever, it's not a great day.
Yeah, and a lot of times they're just crimes of opportunity, right? If it was locked, they would have moved on to the next one. I mean, I know that happens a lot at nights when people are out checking doors and stuff, just car to car to car. Something just opens easy, do a little, take and go. Like it's happened in our neighborhood.
Yeah, and if you don't believe it, go look at download the neighborhood app and everything. It's done by Ring. I'm not sponsored by them or anything else, but it'll tell you reported crimes in this in your area and different footage that people have in your area as well. Now, granted, I think their cameras are frankly garbage 90% of the time. There is great for the spotlights and that. I do like those, because if motion triggers it and everything, then you get a recording and so forth. But they're very finicky on when they trigger sometimes. And if they do, they either trigger too much or not enough, often enough. And that it's like a fine tuning that you have to do. We've gotten fairly good at it with our installers and that, whenever we help a friend out just to set them up for their home. But it doesn't change that you do need to take that time and that to do that. But there's a lot of things like that. Like even on our other trailers, we also would hedge. Like one of the biggest things that we did to hedge risk is we put a car alarm on all our trailers, and we wired it into an extensive battery that so basically if it had a tilt sensor on it, so it took employees a little bit of time to get to learn the system, because they would set off the alarm and everything whenever it was set, because they would forget to disarm the trailer before hooking up to it. But if somebody else tried to hook up to it, tilted it, started messing with it or anything else, it would set off a siren that would wake up half the neighborhood.
Nice.
And it's not like they could just turn it off. And one of the sensors was in part of the frame, so where there was actually two. So even if they cut one, there was still one that was still going off. There is things like that I would highly, highly recommend for any of you that have equipment or have things like that. But maybe you just have a software business, right? So maybe your biggest threat is cybersecurity. Maybe your biggest threat is having risk or compliance in that, especially if you're in healthcare. A huge HIPAA compliance breach, and then if, for example, you have a lawsuit because you leached some of your patient's data or something, that's not a fun day.
No.
Like you're looking at least usually 800 grand loss in that on some of those things. So in retrospect, I got away easy on some of my things, but it doesn't change that you are going to. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you will go through these, especially when you're actively trying to grow your company, trying to raise employees, trying to do all these things. But you need to hedge that risk, and that whatever that looks like for you, that is up to you. And that look at your biggest risk points, and that, like, hey, go through a couple scenarios, and you're not going to do it and get to yourself to what's called an acceptable risk score. You're not going to ever risk like see every single possibility, right? For example, if we suddenly get into a nuclear war, everybody's lost their business. Everybody's lost everything. But the risk of that right now is significantly minuscule in retrospect to all the other risks, right?
Sure.
But doing some basic security, having some basic things on. I'm not talking about going out to Best Buy and buying their bullshit antivirus to put on your computer. That doesn't do jack. Okay, just understand that. That doesn't do jack for compliance. I know most of you don't. If you don't know what compliance is, reach out to Competav, which is the 844-38 IT guy. We will do that for free for you. Okay, that's my shameless plug, at least for that, because there's so many people that don't understand in that, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm compliant. The software's compliant, or this is compliant." But I'm like, your computer, you literally have your password on a sticky note.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
You have a virus on your computer that your crap's out software didn't catch. And so it's recording all the social securities and all this other stuff. That's a problem. And you'd be amazed how many doctors' offices have crap like that on their system.
Yeah, it's scary because, I mean, all you'd have to say is like, hey, I know that you guys don't do this, but I heard about the office down the street and they keep their stuff on secure sticky notes. And when you do that, their eyes are going to dart to where they're at. That's all you need to know. It's like, these are customers that we can help, right? Like they legit need the help.
They do. Well, and the thing is a lot of those people do not. It's the same reason that most people don't have a security system or cameras until they've had their house broken into.
It's too late.
It's the same reason that most people don't have adequate home coverage until something happens that it wasn't covered for. It's not until something happens to their business, like their tools, again, like even me, that happened to me. I have no problem admitting I am just as guilty in some of these aspects, and that when I first was starting, and even certain things that I didn't even think of until later.
And yeah, and it's tough because like hindsight's 20/20, but it's like, how would you know to think about that unless you had that experience? Unless you're working with professionals, right?
Or you get reminded like this, right? You are getting reminded as of right now and everything to tell you like, hey, this is something that you're going to need to learn. This is something that you are going to need to look into. Where is your biggest risk? If you're a software, insurance agent, medical provider, whatever it may be, that, like, look at it and actually understand it. And if you don't understand it, you don't have the time to understand it and anything, then speak to an actual professional that does it for a living and everything, that has seen the different things. Because again, when you're talking to somebody that just wants to do I'm not going to get into names or anything else, because that would also be a breach of HIPAA compliance. But we did have clinic that did come to us for their service and that are previous provider, and that said, oh yeah, we're going to do things compliant for you. And they were significantly cheaper. Like, we had quoted them, like, it was like $1,500 a month at the time, which seems like a lot, but not really. Especially for cybersecurity and 20 employees and managing all that. It's literally less than like $50 per employee per month, like not anything. So, but this other company quoted them like 300. Well, me knowing the industry knows that, well, you can't even do a good backup solution for that cost. But either way, they didn't want to spend that much, and I get it. Needless to say, fast forward a few years, they didn't have any issues for several years, and that granted. But when they did have issues, they got hacked, they got compromised, and one of their computers also failed in that process. And they found out that they had no actual adequate backup.
Oh.
They lost all their, and granted, their software was cloud, but it didn't change that the backup wasn't functional, and that they were supposed to do the backup themselves of that patient data. So they lost literally 8 years of patient records.
Oh no.
They had to rebuild off of paper. They got into literally an 8-year lawsuit with that company in that because of the damages and everything, several $1 million of loss and everything.
Oh dang. And then what is it like? Because I mean, you got to go and cover like cyber security, theft protection, whatever. Can't think of the name for like basically what, a year or two for every one of those patients as well that's been in the breach as well, right? Like, so I mean, it's just not just the lack of not having the right infrastructure in your business, but then you got to go and care for those patients that are now at risk because you didn't take the proper measures as well. So yeah, just
you've got to, and they couldn't hide it because they had no access to the records. And of course, when people would ask, they'd be like, "Oh, our system's down" or whatever else. They did try to downplay it. And this is not a uncommon thing. There's been a lot of doctors' offices that we've come across that have been hacked, that have leaked patient data, social securities, all sorts of stuff. And then the patient's wondering why they have credit card fraud and theft and ID theft and everything else, which is a nightmare. And then the company decides to do the very unethical thing and breach law and not disclose that, because you are by law required to do that. And then they find out later, or one of the employees rats out and everything, because they get pissed off at the owner or whatever. And so now they get a fine for lying, fraud, and lack of compliance.
Oh no. So it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper.
Like when you get caught in a lie, and then you have to make another lie to cover that lie, and then another lie to cover, and it doesn't play out well for you, I promise you. So just do the right thing, hedge your risk from the beginning, and you can avoid a lot of this. Yeah. I actually want you, as an exercise, I want you to write down a few steps and everything. This is the biggest takeaway. Write down, okay, here's the equipment I have, here's the risk and everything, here's the compliance standards I need to do. What can I do to make sure or hedge that risk? And I guarantee you, like, and a lot of you, I already know some of you that are listening to this, they're like, well, I have insurance money that will cover that. Well, if you're shut down, you can't access information for months or whatever, even if they eventually pay out, it doesn't change the fact that most of your employees are going to leave. You're not going to be able to pay their paychecks. There's all these other things that will happen to make that next to impossible, right? And that is a specific exclusion on most insurance policies. Because of the fact that they've paid out so much on it, they are no longer including that on most liability coverages. So just something you should look into and double check. Write the list though, put everything saying, hey, this is what I need to do, and these are the biggest risks that I'm going to do. And then here's some biggest things that Like, hey, if I get disabled or something, do I have workers' comp for me as the business owner or a couple of my employees and that to cover that? Especially if you are in a state that isn't an at-will state, because you have to pay a severance package or something like that. If you're in New York or California or some other places that aren't at-will employment. Here in Utah, and that you can terminate for no reason, you can say it's whatever and wash your hands, right? It's not as big of a deal. So it wouldn't be as big of a risk, but it still makes sure, like, I want to do the right thing for my guys. So I want to make sure if they get injured on a job that we did, yeah, I'm going to do the right thing and make sure that they get paid. So for me, that is not an acceptable risk. Thus we have it. So
if I was kind of like to summarize that list you mentioned, so here's a line of business that I'm in. Here's the equipment that I have. Here's the compliance that I need. Here's what I have in place. What risks am I missing or that I need a shield against? Is that a fair summary?
So shield against theft, compliance, death, accident, injury. Those are really the primary 5 that you're going to come across and need to hedge against. There's obviously natural disaster, all these other things that fall outside of that purview. And I do recommend at least having some of that, but that for like natural disaster, for example, that usually is having enough savings, enough retainer and other things to hedge against that, and just having financial discipline, right? And that will actually provide you stability even during downturn, and that if you have a big client that leaves, and then having best practices like not having one customer be all of yours business or more than a third of your business, because I guarantee you lose them, you're not going to be able to make payroll, right?
Yeah. In fact, I was just talking to somebody last night where they're like, I lost my big fish, and like he's irate. And the note from that organization was, you're done. We're not doing anything else with you after like over a decade of working with them. And so like just nothing. He was just out on the curb with nothing to like, you messed up or thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, do not get comfortable.
Like, yes.
I have even made that mistake in that too, because like you'll get comfortable in that and get just used to that consistency or whatever else. And then they'll have one change of management, or the owner decides to step down, somebody comes in. There's so many different things that can happen.
Yeah.
But then you're there.
It's out of your control. And so that's why diversifying is always great, especially with customers and the income that you're doing.
Yeah, that's a regardless good way to hedge your risk.
Yeah,
regardless of what industry or anything else, diversify in certain extents. I'm not saying to be spread all over the place, but I am saying have clients in different, even industries, right? That way, if one dips, like for example, construction dies down or something, you have this other industry that picks up, mortgages or healthcare or just day-to-day, even restaurants, hospitality, and everything else, etc. I carry quite a bit of variety in different industries because of that sense. Because
exactly.
I understand not every industry is going to do well all the time.
I know some people in people that excavate for homes and stuff, and so they're like, hey, with the economy the way it is, we're going to do more government contracts. And this is probably a year ago they were looking at that type of stuff, right? So, and then you see that over into, you mentioned mortgages, insurance, mortgage rates are going up and everything there. So what are these mortgage lenders doing to find creative solutions to do something, for people that aren't normally going to go
even the government like
stuff? So there's a lot of different ways to absolutely, like you said, diversify yourself in those industries.
Yeah, and even government jobs and everything, while they are relatively stable, they're not as stable as you'd think. There is SAMs in that, and if you even have contracts in that, they can be great. They can be very lucrative in that if you do have a SAMs contract. We lost a big one just because we refused to, during 2020, they mandated that every single one of our employees that went onto base or any of the military bases and that had to have a medical visa and go through all these ridiculous checks and everything else. And for us, that was a huge no-go. It's like, hey, I get it. If they want to choose to, that's a personal medical choice for them. I am not going to hold their job over their head to make that medical decision for them.
And we're seeing a lot of repercussions for that now too. But yeah, you guys lived it.
Yeah. And then now they're trying to say, well, we just recommended it. We didn't mandate it. I'm like, BS. I still have emails and I still have requirement and everything showing like, no, in order for allow any of your staff on site, these are the requirements that you have to abide by. And the big giant one is like, you have to have your health visa or go through all these other tests and everything consistently. And either way, you're going to be restricted from all these other areas.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
So they're like, hey, you have to have that card in that in order to even be allowed or authorized in anything. It actually took a higher precedence than even the background check, which is absurd to me. But I'm getting on the side tangent. But this is.
But right, you just never know the
way,
changes that are going to come your way, and the types of clients. So
you hedge your risk, and you don't have to compromise your character or moral fiber as a human being either.
Yeah,
like that's the other reason that you need to hedge your risk and be able to do these things and that, because I guarantee, and this is the reason I'm not knocking anybody that did this, right? I understand that when it is the difference between whether you are going to be able to feed your family or not, it is vital for you. Like, I get it. You sometimes will make really bad calls to justify or be able to make that paycheck, to be able to do those things and that, to do that. I understand. But what I am saying is now you know what can happen when things get bad and what you need to do to hedge risk to make sure that you don't get put in that situation again to where you have to be put into a decision that you don't agree with or might not be best for you and your family.
Exactly. So, and so, I mean, that kind of backs up to all those things, right? Like if your livelihood gets put in a position like this, what's your alternative to that? And do you have plan B's in place or whatnot? So it's just good to kind of weigh out this whole list that you've been talking about here. So it's been, really insightful.
All right. Anything else that you want to add to it, Danny, even in your personal experiences, or do you want to leave it on that note?
No, I think for the most part, we're just kind of leave it on that note, but just really just don't get complacent, I guess, is really what I kind of take away from it. Just don't get complacent with what you have, and just what's there today could be gone tomorrow, outside of your control. And so what are the things that you can always go back and focus on under your control? And it's managing and shielding against a lot of these risks.
Yeah. It's safeguarding your hard-earned efforts and everything in your career, in your job, your livelihood, everything else. Because even if you worked really hard, had a phenomenal year, but you had like some medical emergency, some family situation or whatever else forced you to live on your own or move to a different state or help family or whatever else, and you had to stay there for 6 months, and that destroys all your savings, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Most people couldn't even do that because they're living paycheck to paycheck. So what are you doing to hedge against that? And what are you, like, you might not be in the situation where you can do it, but let's put an execution plan or mind map where we can get you to there. Like, this is like knowledge and understanding and being self-aware is 90% of the battle. Yep. The rest of the action, right? You might know it, now take action.
It might take you a year to get there, but the fact is that year's going to go by regardless. And so you might as well start planning for it now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us. Please share with somebody you care about that needs to hear this message, that needs to understand and hedge the risk in that. Maybe they blow all their money like it's never going to end. We all know the people that we're talking about. Maybe the people that are always flying by the seat of their pants. I've even been guilty of this, but share it with those people. Make sure that they can get some of this knowledge and protect them. Because we care. We're here to help each other. We're here to help each other grow, to thrive, and to excel, and to make sure that when bad stuff does happen to us, that it's not the end of the world.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
All right. Catch you guys on the next episode. See you next week.
Peace.